gasoline they used, and how many more trees you would have to plant to make the equivalent of that much going into the atmosphere. And I thought that was such an intriguing idea. It's sort of the kind of thinking that I like. So I joined the Sierra Club in April of 1963. And when I joined, they told me I could be a member of the chapter. Where did I live? And I said I lived in the East. They said, oh, you'd be a member of the Atlantic chapter. I said, oh, yeah. It contains all the states on the eastern seaboard from Maine to Florida. And so that's going to be very hard to represent me. So I decided to remain a member of the Bay Area chapter where I was living at the time. And I remained so until 1970. And about that time, the states in the eastern seaboard were seeing that this long Atlantic chapter that went from Maine to Florida really didn't represent local interests at all. And so they began forming smaller chapters, and the New England chapter decided they wanted to be one of them. So they had a meeting in 1970 to create a New England chapter, and they got permission to become one, and the meeting was fantastic. The whole thing was an all-day event. I wrote to a number of people about this, seeing if they could remember better than I was, because I didn't live in Boston at the time. And I actually only got to see the last part of the big celebration. But it was based somewhat on the end of the Earth and how the Earth might be damaged by the kinds of things that were going on, and to give some idea of what we might do about it. The one thing I remember particularly was one of the last events was something about dealing with the fact that the sun almost never shone anymore because of all of the clouds and smoke that was in the atmosphere. But somebody had discovered that at some time, not terribly far from then, somewhere out in the west, there would be a chance to actually see the sun. And it was actually going to take place over what was known as the Grand Canyon National Parking Lot. And people drove out there to get it, and of course filled the parking lot. And everybody was waiting, and the TV was saying about, oh, the sun is beginning to clear up, it's coming, it's climbing. And just as it was about to become sunshine, a big airplane flew over because they had found out they could see it even better from up in the air. And the smoke of the airplane obliterated the sun. Obliterated the sun, so to speak. That was another very imaginative time. It was put on by a group, a theatrical group, and I tried afterwards to get copies of it, and they would not release it. And I don't know why.
So was the plane part of the plan, or was that not part of the plan?
The plane was part of, was accidental to the event, but it happened to be that everybody was so highly motivated to try to see this that they flew a plane to be even closer to give people in the plane a better view. The plane was deliberate to try to see this thing at the right time, and of course it obliterated it for everybody else. It was a fantastic get-together, and people were excited about forming this new chapter. And shortly after it formed, they decided that we also needed to have smaller entities like groups, and each of the states decided they wanted to form their own group. At least Rhode Island and Maine both decided to. By the way, it was only 5 New England states, because the people in Connecticut felt much closer to New York, and they didn't want to decide themselves as Boston. They'd rather go with New York. So it was a 5-state chapter. And I and a few other people from this area decided we didn't want to separate Vermont from New Hampshire because we had so many common interests, particularly those who lived in the Connecticut River Valley. So there's a fellow in Vermont whose name I can't remember. He lived in Thetford on something he called Heffalump Hill. If anybody knows who he is, I would love to remember, but probably only he knows that name. And so we formed a chapter in both Vermont and New Hampshire called the Twin State Chapter.
And this would have been 1970 plus?
About 1973, I do believe. And as time went on, more local groups began to form. Maine and New Hampshire is a pretty large group, not much larger, not as large as Maine, but Vermont and New Hampshire was large. And people formed groups in various areas. In our area, we formed a group containing both Vermont and New Hampshire sides of the Connecticut River, which we called it I think we called it the Upper Valley Group, or maybe the Twins Group. I don't remember what we called it at first. And some of the people in Vermont decided they didn't like being part of something that was also in New Hampshire. And at a meeting in many of you remember Herb Ogden with the cider mill, and a very conservative but very environmentally conscious guy.
He was my neighbor.
His mill had a picture of Goldwater on the outside of it. And he was a very ingenious, clever guy, and he didn't run for election in Vermont. He stood for election because he thought that was better. And he was very much against snowmobiles. He did a lot of things that we agreed with, but he said that too many people didn't really want to be associated with it. And at a meeting held in Windsor, it was decided that the two groups should split. They chose a time when there was a majority of Vermonters. All the ones from Norwich decided with the ones in New Hampshire to keep together, but they outvoted us. And so we had two separate groups for a while.
So within the New England chapter, and then within the Upper Valley chapter, there were separate groups.
That is correct. There was a Twin State group, the Twin State chapter, and we formed a group within the Twin State chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And the New England chapter got a great staff person, Priscilla Chapman. She worked on major issues, not just in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, where she was located, but she helped in Maine to work on Sears Island, and they did a lot of work to try to make sure that Sears Island didn't get turned into an oil refinery. She also worked in Rhode Island on keeping the waterways clean and separated from all kinds of commercial development that would have been nothing wrong with commercial development, but this was particularly bad because it would pollute the waterways. And many of us felt it was wonderful to keep her, so we wanted to keep in with the New England chapter. But after a while, the New England chapter got so involved in the Big Dig and the Third Harbor Tunnel that the meetings just took, almost all the time was taken, and we had trouble getting anything on the agenda that was meaningful to us. So we being almost everybody outside of Boston. And so it was decided that we needed to get something independent, and we created something that was called the New Hampshire and Vermont and maybe other state councils. And they were new entities created for the purpose. And our state council got really quite active and decided it needed to raise money for the things that we wanted to do in New Hampshire, lest money be devoted mostly to the Big Dig. And we got permission to raise money, and we were very successful at it. With the permission to raise money that they would not get, we offered to share, I've forgotten what percentage, 35 or 40% with them, and we would keep the rest. And we were so successful with our aggressive campaign that we raised more. 40% of what we raised was at least twice as much that they'd been getting from New Hampshire before that. So I thought this was a great success, and we were prepared to do it again the next year, and promising the same percentage to them, and they turned us down at the last minute after we had already printed our stuff. So that finished it for some of the people, and they decided that they needed to form their own chapter. So chapters were formed in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island shortly after that event. And
why did they turn you down?
I don't think there's a logical reason for it.
Okay.
I think they were afraid. I think they really found it hard to believe that we had been successful as we were. Maybe they thought we couldn't do it again. But I don't know. We were incensed. Incensed to the extent of actually storming out of the meeting before it was over. So that also meant that we didn't have access to Priscilla Chapman. The chapter that remained could not afford her, so they hired somebody else. And I don't really know quite what happened to her. She was just wonderful. So that was it. In 1990, we were formed as a new chapter, and by that time, the new chapters had their own opportunities for creating groups. And we have once again fought to make a chapter, a group within Vermont and New Hampshire that included the Upper Valley. And to do that, this time, we had to do it across chapter lines, and that had never been done before. So we made our case to the Sierra Club board of directors, and they approved it. And so we became the first interstate chapter of the Upper Valley group. And we're not the only one. There are 2 or 3 of them, but not very many. And so that was really how we got started.
So that, but that is a group that's bi-state group as part of 2 chapters,
right?
The Vermont and the Hampshire chapter,
Right.
And with as both parents, some responsibilities to both parents. With it, we had our own ExCom, etc.
We have our own ExCom. We have representatives who attend the 2 chapters. a New Hampshire representative and a Vermont representative who attend chapter meetings. But other than that, we are on our own and we can make our own decisions. But to the extent that groups can make decisions outside of chapters. Now, we have, in addition to being a twin state group, we've encouraged the Vermont and New Hampshire ex-cons to meet. And we've had 3 quite successful meetings here, which were well attended and very much appreciated by both groups. But at one time, the New Hampshire chapter said, well, I don't think we want to do that anymore. So they kind of withdrew from it. I think Vermont is always just still willing. So, but there were a lot of things dealing with the Connecticut River, dealing with erosion, dealing with land use, dealing with protecting waterways, dealing with the extent to which we can build within the floodplain. The fact that there are some animals, some live creatures in the Upper Valley. It's a kind of toad, I believe, found in Plainfield, just a very isolated area, an endangered species that Nancy Mogilnicki made a big issue of, and we were able to help protect that as a group. We've done good things.
One of the things that has impressed me, Bob, while we've been a member of the Sierra Club, is seeing that chapters can become more efficient and less efficient. There are changes in membership, there are changes in directors, in ex-com members, and sometimes they can become very active, and sometimes they can be almost non-existent.
That's true.
What have you seen in terms of the New Hampshire and Vermont chapters and the Upper Valley group in terms of that trajectory over since the 70s?
Well, let me convert the question first to groups. Within the state of New Hampshire, we've had 4 groups. The Upper Valley group, the Monadnock group, the Seacoast group, and the Merrimack Valley group. The first one to become really active was the Monadnock group. And their formation, when they first formed, they had a total of, I think, 35 members in their area, and the person, Thelma Babbitt, who called the meeting together, got 120 people to attend. When you get something like 3 times your membership to attend an organizational meeting, that is something. And that group was really dynamite. And it went on for quite a long time as the most active of the groups. But then eventually it kind of faded too. It got to the point where it lost interest in its leadership. And they've come back again, and I think they're now sort of in the middle somewhere. The Seacoast group has always had troubles. I don't know quite why. It seems to me that's a natural one. And the Merrimack Valley has lots of ups and downs too. We've had our ups and downs some, but we've been more on the upside. And in general, they've looked at us as the people who've done the best in keeping a group going. I mean, when they bragged at one time of having a meeting in Manchester that 25 people came, the day after we had 160 people at the Montclair Museum. And it's partly because they don't do what we do, and what Dennis is particularly good at doing. It is getting other people interested in the same things we're interested in, collaborating, teaming up. I think that's a part of the game. It doesn't mean you have to be subservient to everybody else. In fact, you can often be the leaders of the other groups, but it is, I think, dynamite that we've been able to get so many people interested in what we're doing. And the program tomorrow night, I hope, will be another example of a lot of people interested.
So the New Hampshire chapter, has it also had ups and downs?
You know, I think it has, and I think it's in a somewhat of a middle down state right now. I think it was probably a little bit more up in the days when we had our first 2 bi-state chapters, and just why I'm not sure. I hesitate to criticize them because I don't keep track of them as well, but they don't intrigue me too as much as they might.
But how long have they had, you know, a director? And what's the role of a director in the New Hampshire chapter?
I can't give you a full answer to that one. It was partly because of the fact that we're an important state because of our primary, and that brings a lot of people in, and I think that's one reason we've had a director who is paid at least in part, if not almost entirely, from San Francisco rather than from Concord. But she does a lot with legislation, and I think she has grown a lot in the years that she's been in the job. I think she does a much better job now of presenting things and testifying before the legislature. How long, I really can't give you a good answer to that. I should be able to, but I can't.
Have you seen also ups and downs with the Vermont chapter and the relationship between the group and the Vermont chapter?
I haven't kept that good track of the Vermont chapter, but I've always been impressed with the ones that I do get to know, and I think they probably had some ups and downs too. But I think they were up longer in this last phase than New Hampshire was. You had a question.
I know you've been interested in zero population growth maybe since the beginning, which was maybe '68.
My first acquaintance with zero population group was even earlier than that. I attended a meeting about that time in Los Angeles. I attended a group meeting in Los Angeles that a friend of mine was a member of, and he introduced me to zero population group.
So I'm wondering whether early on the Sierra Club and zero population growth did any sort of collaborative activities.
That's a very interesting
And I'm
question.
thinking not so much nationally as locally.
Well, locally, I think probably they get along very well. Out in the West, there was some problems because the Sierra Club wanted to do something with regard to this one particular issue that came up. They wanted to do something with regard to trying to keep Las Vegas from extending further and further out into the desert. But they wanted to make a route in such a way that would prevent that. But in the process, the people who were concerned about the Latin American population that was moving there, they felt that would be adversely affecting them. And they thought that the Sierra Club, in trying to do something for the environment, didn't give a damn about population issues. And I think they did, but they didn't want to get involved in the immigration issue. And some of the ZPG people wanted them to get involved in immigration. And they actually did a lot of stuff outside of the immigration issue that were, I think, quite favorable to trying to keep the population down and to keep the rights of people to get information about family planning and the like. They had some very good people who worked on that. Some of the ZPG people didn't give them enough credit, in my opinion.
We attended a lecture up at Burlington, was it last year, the year before, of Paul Ehrlich, and it was fascinating to hear him still today, very active and
Wow.
very well spoken indeed.
Wonderful.
He talked about it's not just population and population growth, but you can talk about climate change, you can talk about wilderness areas, and all of these issues are one. They are all interrelated. It's not just population. It was interesting to hear him say that. But he's no longer associated with Population Connection, which is the
Sequel to ZPG? I do not know.
But meanwhile, the Sierra Club now has its own population and the environment committee, which is pretty active, actually.
Well, that's good. It's always had something like that. One of the people who was head of the then, whatever the name was a good friend of mine, and I think she did a lot of wonderful work, for which she didn't always get full credit.
You mentioned how the Upper Valley Group has been quite strong since its inception. Why? And what do we do right? What do we do not so right? What could get better?
Well, we did have some time when we were not, after we had been the best, we went down below that and then came back up. Well, I think one of the reasons that we do as well as we do is because the energy of some of the people who work on it, particularly you and Betsy, who've done a lot to try to make sure this stays going. As I said earlier, I think one of the things is we collaborate with other groups. We do on things that have joint interests with other people that are in our interests. And by doing that, we keep people aware of who we are, and we keep interest in what we're doing, and we make it possible for, encouraging for people to attend events that we are helping sponsor. And I think people say, that's great. I think that's probably, I'm sure there must be other reasons, but I think that's the main one.
One of the issues that's come up nationally, indeed our executive director has brought up the issue of term limits for people who are on executive committees. One of the things about the Upper Valley Group is we've had lots of new people coming on board the executive committee. There has been a quote turnover, and yet there are people who are members of our emeritus members of the executive committee. They've been members like yourself or
Betsy.
yes, and myself, and Nick, etc. And that seems to have been getting new people on board and getting new energies on board, in my own mind, may have played a role, compared with, I've seen state chapters remain with the same executive committee, the same members, and maybe they could use some change in thought.
When people ask me how come we're successful, I cite that as a major idea, that one can be an emeritus member, be effective, not be a voting member, but be people who can do things and can talk. I hope we don't dominate them too much, but I think allowing people, new people to come in to take the role, to be in control, and have other people taking part is a great idea. And I've never known of anybody else who's accepted that or followed up on that. I don't know why. What's the matter with it?
You've also seen some significant sea changes within the Sierra Club itself. I mean, Mike Bruin, our new executive director, compared with Carl Pope, and you've known executive directors before Carl Pope. How do you see the evolution of the Sierra Club itself, and how that may have played a role here?
I hesitate to answer that one in any detail. I was a great admirer of Carl Pope's predecessor, whose name doesn't come to me at the moment. Michelle Brough.
Brower?
No. I don't think Michelle was ever the president or the head person. I can't remember who it was. But when Carl Pope came along, I thought it took me just about a month or two to realize what a dream he was, how great he was. And I think each one has its own style, and the styles differ, and sometimes the new style can be just as good, even though different from the last. Michael Bruin, I don't know. He came from the Rainforest Action Committee, and he was very effective there. And I've got feeling that he's probably pretty effective here, but I'm not nearly as close to it as I used to be when I was on the Sierra Club Council. And so I don't know. Yeah.
I would say maybe 20 years ago or so, there was a big push for a youth president or head of youth, and we had this fellow who was from Lebanon. Has that continued? Because I just haven't seen any happenings in Sierra Club magazine.
I would say no, it hasn't happened, but I think they've put a lot more attention to young people, and I think they've made more. I think they listened better to the Sierra Student Coalition, which at one time some people were trying to say, well, they're not even all members of the Sierra Club. They don't count anymore. It was actually who was the guy who lived to be 100 years old, who was very high up in the Sierra Club. He spoke to the board and said, look, guys, can't you remember when you were young? Can't you remember the things that you did were good? And you want to listen to these guys.
So David Brower?
Yeah.
David Brower, possibly?
No, it was long after Brower. It was, it may come to me. He was a good personal friend of mine. I think they pay more attention to the young, partly as a result of that.
Well, it seemed like it was hugely successful, and I know I'm always motivated and inspired by youth doing something.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, they've got nothing to lose, and we, are counting our hours and being analytical about it. And sometimes they're like Allie, this young woman in Next Gen.
I
really
agree.
inspiring.
I think it was a very successful adventure, and the previous president worked behind the scenes to do some of the things that age can help with. But they let him go out and do his thing, and he was a personal friend of mine. I admired him a great deal. He actually went to, what is the place in Vermont, the camp?
Oh yeah, what is it?
Not in Berkshire. Yeah, he got interested in the environment there. And so he was from the West Coast, so he had a real dual connection between these two.
So you were on the national board?
No. I was on something called the Sierra Club Council. For a while it was the Sierra Club Council, and it had one representative from each chapter, plus a few other people. So I've forgotten what some of the committee chairs were on it. And what we did was to meet to discuss affairs less particularly with regard to kind of legislative work that the council, the Sierra Club board does, but dealing things with more with groups and chapters, problems from the grassroots, and trying to bring those. We'd also come up with resolutions, which then present to the board, and they could accept them or reject them. In order to make this, they changed this in some way. They took away some of its powers and gave it a better name, Sierra Club, Council of Club Leaders. But in the process of making them club leaders, they took away some of their prerogatives. I thought that was a mistake, but it wasn't a bad mistake.
So at what point there's an organization that broke off the lawyers, the one that...
Earth Justice.
Earth Justice. Do you know the story behind
Sierra
that?
Club Legal Defense Group.
It was once called the Sierra Club Legal Defense. It was never part of the Sierra Club.
Oh.
It was an independent agency. But people confused it with the Sierra Club and thought it was part of the Sierra Club, so they felt they should change their name. I think they were probably right. Similar to the way the Hanover Conservation Council changed its name to Hanover Conservancy because people couldn't tell it from the Hanover Conservation Commission. Now it has a name that's at least somewhat more different. It was something like that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Really appreciate that. The context is fascinating to see how the organization has changed.
Yeah.
But indeed, the Sierra Club has changed enormously. When you became a member, you couldn't just join the Sierra Club. You had to be recommended by somebody.
That is correct. You needed to have a recommendation of a member, which to me that was an opportunity because I knew that the secretary, the chief factotum in the math department at Berkeley when I was on leave, was a member of the Sierra Club, so I got her to sign my membership, and that created a great relationship for me. So I didn't mind having to get the signature, but it's true. A couple of years after that, that got dropped. Another major thing that happened only a few years after that was associated with the idea of the breaking up of the Maine to Florida chapter called the Atlantic chapter. When they began breaking that up, somebody said, well, at that time, I think there were about 16 groups in the Sierra Club, of which 10 were in California, and the others were, there was one up in the Pacific Northwest, and I don't know where the others, but there weren't many outside of California. And somebody said, well, at least we should be able to keep the direction of this Sierra Club on the West Coast. And a bunch of the guys in the East decided, no, that wasn't going to happen. So they nominated somebody from Washington, D.C. to become chairman, and they got enough votes that he actually became chairman. And the California people really went up in smoke, except for two really good guys. One was the guy who supported the Student Coalition, and I've forgotten who the other one was. And they said, you know, if you really want to get somewhere, you want to represent the country, not just California, you better go with this.
What year was this?
I would say it was about 1976 or 7, somewhere around in there. It was when the votes were counted. I was there when they were counted, and people were just dumbfounded that this actually happened. So one of them said, "This Sierra Club's going to change." I said, "Well, maybe for the better."
But the Washington office has become much more prominent.
Oh yes, and they worried about that. That would then start to drain energy from San Francisco. Well, if you want to lobby in Washington, you better go away from San Francisco.
That's right. That's interesting. Money has played a big part in the Sierra Club, and the Bloomberg money that has been instrumental in getting their Washington offices as physically prominent as they are. Something good, something bad?
Well, talking about money, I would say getting the Washington office going and getting a lot of activity going in the Washington, D.C. area was good. I think that's been made us more effective, made us not only more effective because we were there, but because we also represented more of the country better. However, since that time, a lot of the money that used to come in to the Sierra Club that was unallocated, uncommitted to any project, that is drying up very, very fast. So most of the things that the Sierra Club gets money on that it can use for environmental activity or conservation activity is earmarked. And consequently, money talks as to where the earmark is going to go. And And what this has meant is some of the projects that some of us would love to see worked on don't get funded. But the Clean Coal campaign and some of the other campaigns, these are good campaigns. These are big issues. But they now are about the only way you can get money for things. And the jobs have changed as a result. One of my good friends who works for the Sierra Club has worked for a number of different entities within the Sierra Club. And he still is able to find ways where his skills at writing and presenting things can be used. So he still has his job. But he doesn't work on the things that he most preferred to work on. He works on stuff where the projects are.
My
That's
image,
not necessarily bad.
my own image of the Sierra Club is it starts out as being more wilderness, out-of-doors stuff. And then maybe along the time that Rachel Carlson came along, it became more toxics in the environment. And then now seems much more climate change oriented and things that are... Is that accurate?
You people can probably judge as well as I. I think it's quite climate change oriented. Also, a lot of it's done in endangered species types of issues, wolves and whales and the like. That's becoming very, very dominant. And the Clean Coal campaign is just part of the climate change campaign. It's a very big one in Kentucky and West Virginia.
I think, Dennis, it was originally a California hiking club more than anything else.
Yeah, and John Muir certainly was interested in exploring the wilderness. I think it was probably more of a hiking club. As the wilderness became threatened, they decided they needed to do something to protect it. And when Hetch Hetchy came, that changed the game too. So but you're right, it was much more of an active outdoors club.
Which actually it still is in California.
To a large extent.
Okay, Bob, do you have anything else that you wanted to say to us tonight?
You've been very patient.
No, certainly appreciate this.
Much appreciated.
You're more than welcome to stick around if you like.
I'm planning to. I am an emeritus member of the Council, so I tend to be here now that I'm here.
Good.
Would you like me to sit somewhere else, or somebody else can be on the spot?
No, you're
You
fine.
can stay there.
So can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So, so I'm the rep to the New Hampshire, and you had just said that the executive director is really more supervised or answers more to the California, to the national office than New Hampshire. Did you say that?
Which person?
The director
The
of the New
director
Hampshire
of the
chapter,
New Hampshire chapter?
Kathy Corcoran is.
No, I think she actually works very much on New Hampshire issues. In particular, she does a lot with legislation. I'd say she does both, and she does it quite well. And she actually, I think, she intended that she'll split her time that way. But she does a lot with the legislature and following legislation, presenting bills that she thinks will be of interest, and arguing why they would be of interest.
So does she formally work for the executive committee in New Hampshire, executive committee, or does she work for national, or is there a split there?
I don't know. I think there's a split, but certainly she works partly for national.
And her predecessor was pretty good too. Marie was good too before.
Yes.
Bergen,
Yeah, Marie Bergen was good.
I'm impressed by how vibrant this group is, because I was involved with a very abortive attempt to form a Lakes region group, and that really never got off the ground. And the reason it didn't was the person who was really doing it, he got a job transfer somewhere else, and it required people who really had the time and the energy to do it, and there weren't enough people to do it.
It was very interesting. I was much involved in the attempts to form a Lakes Region group, and we finally got enough people together to really form an executive committee. And we had even one extra person who wanted to go along with it. And almost the day that it was to form, the guy got transferred to Maine, and one of the other members of the ExCom went to Florida, and so we didn't have the full complement. It came close, but it was going to be tenuous anyhow, because it would be hard to get enough people. Part of it was because there were some other activities going on in the Lakes region, which did some of the things that we wanted to do. But I think it would have been great to have gotten a group there. We had dreams of doing a North Country group beyond that. And we settled for 4 groups that we have now. I'm glad you remember that.
Okay, any other questions for Bob? All right, well, let's proceed on with the